Welcome back to the Property Buyble. My name is Kim Ackerman. I'm a buyer's agent from Trelease Associates in Sydney. Now, we're on season 2 of the Property Buyble. This is a very exciting season, all about investing, investments, building investment portfolios, and everything in between. Now, today we're going to be talking about using data analysis to choose the right investment property. So many people get out there and they just go and choose an area that they like, or they choose an area based on what somebody else has said that they should choose. And there's so many factors that go into choosing the right investment property. Data analysis absolutely should be used during this process. So I have a very exciting guest. He's a data scientist. His name is Ken Lardner. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you, Kim.
Super excited to have you on today. You have over 30 years experience in this data world, specifically relating to property and real estate data analysis. Is that right?
Yeah, it's probably the property specific stuff started in the late 90s. So give it a few years. It'll be round out to 30 pretty soon. That's,
there's so much to talk about today with relation to data analysis and how people should be using it to find investment property. But before we get into that, I really want to give people a bit of a background on yourself and, what you've been doing up until now. You've lived in Australia, you've lived over in China, you work with JLL and various other large companies. You've worked with CoreLogic, and you actually can everyone just get ready for this? Kent Lardner built the original platform for Price Finder.
Yes, the price estimate tool.
The price estimate tool. Like, any real estate agents listening or people in the real estate industry will know how amazing that is. Maybe regular buyers won't understand about Price Finder, but this is a huge tool that is used.
Well, at the time, I look back at it and say, okay, it's version 1 or maybe version 2. And I'm up to version 22 in my mind, and it's evolved a lot. But back then, it was a bit intimidating, because launching a product like that, I'd never done anything specifically consumer facing like that. So you're creating a product and you're leading with your chin. Yeah. And if you make a mistake, it's out there. So we did as much as we could. And we didn't have a lot of the techniques we've got now to, like a lot of machine learning or a lot of things that are automated. A lot of things we had to kind of do by hand and then code them. Wow. But the objective back then was, how can we create something that empowers people to come up with an accurate price estimate? So it was intimidating and it was fun.
And a learning curve, I'm sure.
A very steep one.
Massive learning curve. So obviously a lot has changed since then, and we have a lot of automated systems, and you've taken advantage of that and really made data your realm and your atmosphere, and you're helping so many people to do so. And still, guys, if you don't know who Kent is, go and Google him, because I can't stress this enough. The systems and the programs that he's built, which we're going to talk a little bit about today, are just so insanely useful. You and I are working now for some of my investor clients to find investment properties using this data, amongst a myriad of other things that we're doing using your products. So it's so excited to get into that sort of stuff. But look, as we start talking about this topic, it's going to get back on track. Basically, when we're talking about choosing the right investment property using this data, it is almost impossible to look at all of the data in Australia, every property, every suburb, manually.
It is hard, and I try and compile that and interpret that for people. And I think data visualization, data interpretation is a very important layer. So there's been a lot of advancement in that space as well. An everyday average person can create powerful mapping tools now, and that used to be the domain of the IT geek, but now an average person can create some pretty powerful maps. So I think the data visualization is a big thing. I've focused very much on that. And then right upstream of that is aggregating as much data as possible and then structuring it in an interesting way. And what I did is I built some software with lots of icons. You can just flick through them all. And the reason why I did that is I was compiling all of this data in spreadsheets, and the feedback I got from people was, I don't know what to do with it. I don't know how to interpret it.
It's all there.
It's all there, but it's too much for a lot of people. And I understand that. So that was the trigger for me to say, how can I take this aggregated data and actually present it
make it more user-friendly.
Make it user-friendly and make it fast. And I think that was a biggie, because if you've got a short list of 10 suburbs, you don't want to spend a day. You want to go flick, 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 flick and get through it and narrow it down to a handful, maybe two or three.
Yeah. And so, okay, so when we're talking about data analysis when it comes to buying investment property, this, in my opinion, is one of the most important parts and one of the most biggest things that people should be considering when they're looking for investment property. You know, whether or not you're using a buyer's agent or an investment strategist, obviously that makes it 10 million times easier, but there are things that people can do. So when you have this data that you've been working on for years and years, you know, you've made it more user-friendly, you've made it more, given it more of an ability to be filtered and used and made into more of a bespoke product per client, there's different types of things that you do. One of those things is, you know, not only knocking it down to various suburbs, but you have specific what's called SA3 regions.
I focused on that because back in the day, a lot of us used local government areas. I'll just call it LGA.
Yeah.
And the problem that we had with LGAs is Brisbane and Gold Coast, because they just kept on growing like the blob.
Yeah.
And, you know, massive city-size LGAs. So the LGA became certainly less efficient way to analyse an area. Now, the focus of an SA3, Statistical Area 3, the Australian Bureau of Statistics, I'll just say ABS, what they do is they carve up areas into statistical modules. And the smallest one they use is called an SA1. And that's about 200 homes, and then it goes a bit bigger. SA2, it's about 2 to 3 suburbs big. And then there's one a little bit bigger than that called an SA3. These SA3s, about 350 of those around the country. And then they roll up into an SA4, and there's about 100 of those.
Okay.
Now, these, if you apply the Goldilocks analogy of the best fit, suburbs often have too few sales to be meaningful from a modelling, statistics, whatever. How do you know what the median really is of a suburb if nothing is sold in the suburb in the last 6 months?
There's not enough data.
Not enough data. Whereas, and specifically if you look at median prices and you go along the beach, I love to use the beach analogies because that's the most common problem we face is a lot of these beaches have price market A along the beach, and then price B is kind of in the middle, and then price C up the back. But you go down to Wollongong, for example, you've got properties that are on the escarpment down the back and up and with views. So it gets really complex. So we've got this country that's made up by and large, 20-30% of suburbs or more hugging the coastline or near the coastline that misbehave. So by grouping suburbs together in SA3s, when you look at the data, and let's pick on price for a minute, when you look at prices and you look at the distribution, you want it to look a little bit like a bell or a bell-shaped curve. And that's when we say it's normal. When you're measuring medians, if it's not normal, it's going to be volatile.
Is that from a graph perspective?
Yeah, you can plot it. And there's some standard statistical software that plots it. Another way to look at it is price segmentation. If you look at the price segmentation and group them up into what's sold in that bracket, say 750 to 1 mil and then 1 mil to 1.25, and you do all those price segments, what you're doing is tallying how many sell in each of those segments. And if you look at the shape of that, it looks like a normal bell-shaped curve in many suburbs, but a lot of them don't look like that. And if you go to the beachside suburbs, you typically got 3 distributions and they misbehave. So that was probably the first thing I picked up on. So for me, I was doing this automated valuation model work, building models to predict house prices in the early days. I was learning, I was trying to index older sales. So what I was trying to do is say, hey, I have too many properties that have sold in this suburb, same problem. And I needed to go back a year or back 2 years and index them up and still use them and have some local suburb level data to play with. And the indices were misbehaving. And that was the root cause. And what I found was by stepping out and going to these statistical area 3s, the data started to behave. The AVM started to work better. The indices looked quite well. So you've probably heard of the Hedonic Index and the CoreLogic. That's their approach to resolving the same problem with a different approach. This is a really simple approach. This is grouping together suburbs, clustering suburbs together according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the ABS standard, and then measuring prices, measuring the median price at that SA3 through time. Anybody can understand that.
And this is what I love about the way that your mind works. You've had all of these years working on data. You've been able to analyse things at a suburb level, things from a SA1, SA2, SA3, SA4, maybe SA4 not enough, maybe SA2 too much. You've narrowed it down to this SA3, which works really perfectly in synergy with our uses and how the market works in real estate.
And it's simple. You can explain it. And then the other thing I like to do is I've been using these SA3s for the models. So when you start to build out these statistical models, you've got all these standard measures that say, does it work or doesn't it work? Is it significant?
So you're testing it.
You're testing it, or it's testing itself.
Yeah.
And when you start to play around with data sets at the SA3 level, they work better.
Yes.
So, I've tried suburbs, I've tried SA2s, and the one that seems to work best is this SA3. So there's something to this.
Yeah. And that's the thing, when we talk about using data analysis to help us find the right investment property, we have to talk about we're not analysing every single item of this data individually. Everything is based off of statistical information, having some definitive boundaries around the information that you're collecting, and then watching the patterns that are occurring to be able to use for us to create wealth and to be able to pinpoint properties. In a nutshell.
And what you want to do, you want to measure risk. And my background really started from a risk perspective. And all we've had for the last 20 years is effectively a diminishing risk with interest rates the way they've been. So we're in a very interesting time right now. With interest rates starting to go up, we're about to face some risk that did exist in the 90s, maybe in the early 2000s. A little bit of a blip during the GFC, but by and large, housing markets haven't had risk for 20 odd years. So it's going to be, and it's going to be fascinating. The data's going to show up some very interesting things. But the point really is selecting areas. Anybody could have really thrown the dart blindfolded and hit a bullseye and had a good run.
Yeah, which a lot of them do.
And and I think that what that's done is create a lot of false prophets, or a lot of people that genuinely believe that they're experts when it comes to data. And I don't think they've been challenged yet. So that's why I am looking forward to this, not because of there's going to be a downside, people hurt.
Of course.
So I've got to respect that. But from the truth perspective, that okay, we really get to sort out, as Warren Buffett says, who's been swimming naked.
And this is the thing, I'm a big advocate for accuracy. So many people, there are a lot of opinions out there when it comes to property investment. And I love data very much similarly to, the legal system and law. There are books written on what are the rules, and it's all quite structured, even though it can be manipulated and so forth. And the same goes with data. It's more accurate. The writing's on the wall. This is what it is. You can't really argue with that. And you can use it to do things that we can't possibly do as humans, or possibly know with the forecasting and so forth. But oh my God, there's so many parts of this that we could branch off to. Let's try and stick on track. And, when we're talking about this data that you are collecting to help people and to help myself, for example, and my investor clients purchase property, what are some of the pieces of data that you collect in these SA3s that help you, because you score SA3s to give them a risk rating, and that's how we start choosing.
Yeah, so I start with the SA3, do a lot of the modelling at the SA3 level, and then blend that with some suburb level data. But let's focus on the SA3 for a moment. What I look at is primarily the capital growth stuff, which is your inventory is your lead indicator. So let's talk about
the money is.
That's what, and I love inventory is a great lead indicator. In Australia, we've been focused on days on market for a long time, but in America, they use inventory. You look to the typical.
So like the supply.
Exactly. But inventories, the media understand what inventory is. The average real estate agent in the States understands what inventory is. So they're very well educated on this metric. But I think Australia's lagging because we've just focused on days on market. But I use days on market, but when you go head to head with inventory in these models, which variable jumps to the top as the most significant? It's inventory every day of the week. So what is it? It looks at how many properties on average are listed for sale in that SA3, and then it looks at how many properties are sold on average every month in that SA3. So, for example, if you've got 50 properties for sale and 10 selling per month, 50 divided by 10, 5 months of stock. So what you've got in inventory as a data point is two things you can glean from it. The trend, are inventory levels building or going down? And where is it today? Is it high or is it low or somewhere in between? So as a general guide, something between 4 and 5 months I'd call a balanced market. You know, buyers and sellers, nobody has a distinct upper hand. But when you get down below 2 or below 3 months of inventory, the seller has the upper hand. So it's a seller's market. And at the other end of that, when you've got something at 9 months and higher, definitely a buyer's market. So that's so you've got a couple of key things. So inventory is the biggie in terms of a lead indicator as to where prices are going. But in isolation, you can never just isolate inventory and have a simple model that's just inventory versus price. There's other stuff.
There's other factors. We call these key indicators when we're going through this process.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, it's endless how many key indicators or how many indicators in general.
Yeah, and you can overfit, but what the machine learning does is it says, in this situation or this data set or above this value or below that value, I'll build some models over here using those parameters. And what it does is it does that thousands of times. So it can ingest lots and lots of different data points, including old census information. And it's amazing how much something that the census from 5 years ago can be used as just a single data point, not even a time series, just a single point in data. It says, look, this area's got more than 50% rental tenure. I'll build a whole branch of models for forecasting over here based on that one data point.
It's completely inaccurate.
So what it does is it's trying to build the best model by just using everything it's got. And when you give it some of that old census stuff, which is about to be new, which is nerds getting very excited, the census stuff has a very, very big role to play. But specifically looking at what I use at that SA3 level for the models, inventory's my biggie. I do look at 10-year trend. So the price trend over 10 years is really important as well. I look at days on market and you look at price. So the price itself and where that price is relative to the rest of the country, the sold price. When you look at the median of SA3, that's meaningful in its own right. You've got a whole stack of the census stuff, your demographic stuff, we know that. And you've also got some of the rental information.
And the vacancy rates also.
Vacancy rates. So I certainly look at, I love to look at vacancy rates at the SA3 level because they become a little bit more robust. At a suburb level, they can bounce around. So you've got a suburb that's only got 10 rentals. You know, it only takes 1 or 2 vacancies and suddenly the vacancy rate looks like it's the sky's falling. So when you start to zoom out at the SA3 level, measures like vacancy rates are a lot more robust. Just like your medians.
And we talk a lot, you and I talk a lot about, you know, the anomalies when you're analysing this data to begin with, because it's not just about having the data, it's about making sense of it, which is, I guess, the next stage of things. And having that SA3, and I'm just kind of like, it's not something we talked about, but I was just kind of like thinking out loud here, having stuff at that SA3 level, you know, not having an area big enough, you might have 0 properties for rent, but that doesn't necessarily mean the vacancy rates are low. It might just mean that no properties are up for rent in that region.
But when you do it, the SA3s by and large have a pretty good rental pool. But what you do is you look at something, they call it rental tenure, and the Australian Bureau of Statistics presents it as the percentage of rental properties, and on average it's about a third. You know, but I think what we're going to find this time around, I think it's going to start to nudge up to about 40%. So the census, the new census information, which
you must be excited about that.
It's just nerd heaven.
Even I'm excited about the census because that's going to change things, and I'm sure that the data that you're about to input into your system will just fly everything off the handles.
Yeah, it's going to be fantastic. So I'll have to reprocess a lot of the models and crunch a lot of stuff. That's fine. I retrain the models monthly, but giving it a whole new set of census information, that's exciting stuff. But I think where we're going, obviously with rental, and I know I'm branching around all over the place, but I think the rental tenure spaces, we're going to become a lot more like Germany or a lot of the European countries where they're nudging towards that 50% rentals.
Interesting.
But what you do find is volatility kicks in. So if you've got areas where there's high concentration of rentals, and we found this with COVID, a lot of the overseas students didn't come back.
Yeah.
And those suburbs that had 50% plus rental, they suffered.
Yeah.
So what you find is rentals can be a little bit volatile. They're fluid in that, something goes wrong, the renters move back home with ma and pa or whatever. So, rental tenure is a fantastic metric.
Yeah.
And you feed that into models as well, whether it be for rental models or capital value models. It stands out. It's quite important. The Australian Bureau of Statistics, I keep on saying, I should say ABS, sorry.
Yeah.
They publish a lot of information too, such as building approvals, and they publish that down to the SA2 level regularly. The last time I think I checked it, it's coming out monthly, but there's a bit of a lag to it. So I'm grabbing that each month, I'm refreshing that, I'm feeding that into the model at the SA3 level. And it's fascinating to use that because you can compare how many buildings have been approved, new housing stock, and you can calculate the pipeline supply. So then you start to couple that with building forecasts to say, I'm going to forecast what the sales volumes will be. That can feed into it. I'm going to feed in what the listings volumes will be. That feeds into it.
Stop it, Ken.
So you can do these really nice forecasts for both sales and listings, and you combine those two together, and what do you get? Inventory.
So interesting. I love this shit. Like, it's so amazing. Like, even just that one example about, the inventory and all these different things that feed into that help you forecast. And forecasting is such a biggie, and I definitely want to touch on that. But, this is an extreme amount of data that we're talking about. And just to recap on some of those things we just mentioned, the data analysis that's performed, whether it's by Kent as a data scientist or somebody else in the field, they're taking all of these different things that we're talking about, the vacancy rates, the yields, the capital growth, the sold prices, the building approvals, taking all of it, scoring these regions to help us try to find the best investment property possible. And we're talking about, in Australia, I think we were talking about this the other day, 15,000 plus suburbs just in Australia. When you're talking that amount of data, it's impossible to do this manually almost. And so having tools like this is super important, and not just being able to look at the data as is and as we look at it now, but you also forecast as well when we're going through this process. So we talked a little bit about this the other day, obviously off air, but could you give people a bit of a rundown on how the forecasting is done?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that's the good stuff, right?
Well, I've attempted to forecast prices, and that's really volatile, and the statistical significance of these models is dodgy.
Yeah.
And so price forecast is very hit and miss. So what I've done is I've focused on forecasting the lead indicator of inventory. I forecast days on market, and I also forecast vacancy rates. And they're a lot easier to forecast. The models tell me they work much better. And how I forecast inventory, you forecast sales volume, you forecast listings volumes, and you can pile in all of the data you have, including your back series. So you've got, they call it panel data. You've got the same data set month on month on month back for the last few years. And then you've got some static information like your census stuff, right? So it all goes in one beautiful big table, a monster-sized table, and the model spits out a forecast. And it says, does it work well? Because what you're doing is you're saying, I will build the model using data as of 3 months ago, as of using data 6 months ago, to predict what it is today. And you say, how well did it work?
Yes.
And then you say, okay, it worked well. Now I'll use that model and I'll plug in today's data. What does that give me? A projection forward. And obviously that's within a defined range of variables, defined value set that could change. So these models, you always need to call out. There's limitations to all these. None of these models are perfect because if something radically changes, well, all bets are off.
Yeah.
What you need to do is make the assumption that all of the stuff going in, all the data values going in, the stuff that's going to vary in the next 6 months is going to be within that range. If anything steps outside of the range that you've used, all bets are off.
Yeah. God, and you can really, there's so many ways you could turn it on its head and emphasize some parts and not other parts. And it also depends on what is important to the client as well when we're looking for investment property, because some may not want that, really high yield. The capital growth may be more important, for example.
Well, you can build models. What I do is I create a very simple score, a 1 to 5 score.
Yep.
And it aligns to the way valuations work. So if you've ever ordered the bank valuations and you've looked at them, all their risk ratings are 1 to 5.
Yep.
I've aligned to that. So your 1 is the lowest risk, 5 is the highest. So I've taken that approach to it to try and align it to the way mortgage risk is managed. What I've done is I've scored every SA3. Every area has been given a score. The standard score I use in my product, the spreadsheet product, it's a bit of a balanced scorecard. Yep. So it doesn't just look at capital growth. It weights heavily on the capital growth stuff, but it also looks at stuff such as your vacancy rates and your rental trends. And
so all around good properties.
It looks at that. Now, there's scope with my particular product. It's a spreadsheet that is designed to allow power users to do their own thing as well.
Yeah.
So you can use as much or as little of my scoring as you want. So a lot of people choose to do their own filtering, and some people have asked for their own bespoke scorecards,
which is what I'm using with you.
Yeah. So you can take a couple of approaches here. Some people say, look, cash flow is so important to me, especially interest rates going up. Capital growth, great, but I need to know that the cash...
Especially if they're like retarees and the capital growth is much of a much, if you know what I mean. Like they just want a good solid income.
And they don't want stress.
Yeah.
So then you can weight the variables that pertain to the rental stuff. And then you've got
manipulate those.
You say, okay, look, we're not going to ignore the capital growth stuff. We're not going to accept suburbs that have been declining in value for the last 10 years. Okay. That's an extreme example.
Yeah,
but effectively you shift your scorecard and weight what's important to your client.
Yes. Because just because yield is more important, the cash flow is more important than the capital growth, that doesn't mean that there are other factors of those things that aren't important, and those other factors may link up with the capital growth, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
It's endless.
And it's great when you can have both.
Yes. Oh, that's the golden ticket, right, in property investment. Good cash flow and good cash flow, good yield and good capital growth.
Yeah.
Oh my God. It's just fucking great, Kent. I absolutely love this shit. And I just think, too many people go off on a whim and I want to buy an investment property, and alarm bells always start going off my head.
Well, I made the mistakes. We spoke before the show.
Yeah.
A lot of people jump in making a mistake.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest problem is you listen to the wrong people, or you listen to those in your inner circle who say, yeah, that's a great spot. I love that spot.
Yeah.
And then you start to look at photos and the photos look great.
Yeah.
And then you're down the rabbit hole.
It's an emotional response to a logical decision that should be made. Anyway, that's very overwhelming, all this stuff. Anyway, so super excited about all this. And you and I are working together now, where you're going to be helping a lot of my investor clients, pulling that data. We've started working together from a bespoke level as well, specifically customizing the data to suit different clients I'm working with, including myself, to build my portfolio. And then using that human level, like for myself, such as a buyer's agent, to analyze it, put short and long-term plans in place for the clients, and start to customize every experience. And I just think that's just so invaluable. But you have a few products And this is the thing. This is when the human brain comes in. You know, you've got all your computer systems and your programs, but you still need somebody to come in and analyze this information, make it suitable for yourself or the client or whoever the case may be.
Yeah.
So that's why I've loved even working with you on these big or these small things, because we grab all this data and then we're able to look at it and narrow down. You might have 3 suburbs that come up as the best scoring suburbs, but they may not be in your price range, for example.
Yeah, and you've once you scratch the surface, there's always data anomalies.
Yeah.
And you know, so I do everything I can to make this as robust as I can, but you should always, you know, use it as a guide.
Yeah. Use it as a guide, exactly.
Use it as a guide.
And still look at things on a customizable level. Even if you were to find 3 suburbs, for example, one of those suburbs may be 80% in a flood zone, and you may be worried about purchasing in a flood zone because of everything that's been happening recently. Like, there's so many different things to look at. It's about assessing what is important to you personally, even though we're buying an investment property, and this should be based off of a strategic decision. Yeah. You may still have particular things about your search that are important to you, regardless.
I think we spoke about earlier too. An approach that I've been nurturing for the last 6 months is to start with an area, and then on that free membership tier, I've done all the REA searches by SA3. So I've grouped together all the suburbs. So you click a link and you say, okay, I want to look at Newcastle. Oh. All the suburbs within the Newcastle SA3 are in this single link, and then you sort by price, and it will flush out some suburbs that you may not otherwise look at.
Yeah.
And if you sort by low price to high, all your high yielding properties will be at the top of that search result. So I'm actually quite fond of the approach of picking your area, then go to the property and look for individual properties specifically, and then look at the suburb as part of your due diligence DD step.
Yeah. And as long as you're staying within those parameters, you're still making informed, smart decision, but then you start to add some emotional components to it and maybe choose something that you like the look of or is on a nicer street because you think, if I like it, other buyers are going to like it down the track, or renters are going to like it.
Renters are going to like it, yeah.
So there's so many components, and that's why, it's good for people to just have a better, more strategic approach to buying investment property. For God's sake, try and use a product like Kent's. Even just go on to suburbtrends.com and have a look at this data. Sometimes it's a lot, and this episode is quite advanced in comparison to a lot of the fundamentals that we normally go through on this show. But I love getting into this stuff because when people are at this level to start exploring this, I don't expect anyone to listen to this episode and go away and go into your suburb and then go buy a property tomorrow. This is a learning exercise just to bring this even into people's realm of thinking, then take the next step. So we could talk all day and then some. I think we should give people some tips because this has gone well over where we were meant to go over at this stage, which I'm okay with. But I think, just to give people some short, sharp tips to take away from this fantastic episode. Start studying the various aspects that make up a good investment. Start understanding it's more than just yield, capital growth, it's vacancy rates, it's demographic, it's population growth, it's the ABS information. Have an idea of what all that means as a blanket rule. So that's a big tip. The next thing is to understand that there's 2 parts of data analysis, which we've spoken about. There's the actual data collection, which someone like Kent does, but then there's the measuring and the analysis portion, which is a very important part of this. Don't just take data off Kent's website and go buy a property tomorrow. You have to look deeper, and then you have to look at opportunities from that point onwards. And just because there's a home in one particular area that is a credit score or risk rating, of 1, doesn't mean you should go buy it tomorrow. It doesn't mean it's a good investment. The third thing is, obviously check out your website and all the data you have. It's free. It's free. Like, there is so much on there. I often go on there and just have a look and look at what SA3s are trending as risk 1, for example, just to get an idea of where things are at. The fourth thing is explore the use of a buyer's agent, or more specifically, an investment strategist. These are the people, an investment strategist will analyze this information. It's what I'm doing for my clients now, and they're going to look at things not just from a buying and selling perspective, but from a data perspective and give you the right information, we hope, if it's a great investment. The last thing really is, we talk about this a fair bit, don't get caught up in investment gossip, I like to call it. And that is, you know, when you're standing around at a barbecue with all your mates and people start saying, I heard you should buy in Brisbane, or Adelaide is really booming at the moment. I mean, you must hear that all the time.
Yeah. The biggie that I am scared about is the amount of top 10 lists based on suburb median changes.
Oh, that gives me anxiety.
And there's a lot of these happening.
Yeah.
And what will happen naturally is the ones that are anomalies will get to the top of the list.
Yeah.
So if you've got suburbs that have non-normal distributions or data blips or other problems, they're the ones going to get to the top of the list. And you don't want to be jumping at shadows like that.
No. So don't listen to the gossip. Make well-informed decisions, intelligent decisions, so that you can start building your property portfolios with the right information, and that is going to give you the best chance of wealth for the long term.
Yeah, it's a long-term play.
It's a long-term play, property. This is not something we flip over in a day. A lot of these properties we hold in our portfolio for 7 to 10 years, even longer. Some never sell them. They just pass them down from family to family. But don't listen to all the gossip. Engage somebody's services that knows what they're talking about. Use real data, sort through the anomalies, have a human person come in and try to make some well-informed decisions moving forward. So that's all I have to say on all of that.
Good summary.
Kent, thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.
I am so honoured to have you here today, and I'm so glad that you are happy to come on and chat about this, because I love this stuff so much. It's disgusting. And you obviously love it as well. And it's not for everybody, but it is really important when you're getting into this high-level stuff to...
You're going to spend a lot of money. There's some good tools out there, and a lot of them are free. Yeah,
exactly. But thank you. I'm sure, we'll speak again during the week about other stuff, but this has been great. I hope it's been great for anybody else watching or listening. I hope that, you've taken something, if anything, from this. Go check out Kent's website, Suburb Trends, suburbtrends.com. Check out all the data and, enjoy.